Well, the reason we're here today is that we're talking about GTFS validation with a new platform that we've just released here at Foursquare ITP. It's called Reflect, and we'll talk to you a little bit more about it in just a moment. So here we are. In the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to cover a little bit about introductions and just why GTFS matters and why validation in particular is important. And then we want to show you some of the things we've learned from validating hundreds of feeds across the United States, the top issues that appear out there, why they're important to fix, and how you can fix them. And then we also want to leave you with some ideas about a broader notion of GTFS quality beyond just validating your feeds and how platforms like Reflect can help you achieve those goals. And then finally, we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers if you have any. So jumping right in, my name is Wiley Timmerman. I'm the lead developer for Reflect. This is a platform we have at Foursquare ITP that's for schedule reviews and for GTFS validation. And we've just released a free public component of it that's just a GTFS validator that you can use for free. So I'm a part of Foursquare ITP's data science team with Adam Recchia, who's our data science team manager. So Foursquare ITP is a transportation planning firm. We have a data science team that builds tools and web apps for clients. And we also do kind of tough data science problems for clients as well. So we're excited to release Reflect. We'll tell you a little bit more about all the features at the end and specifically how to use that validator today. So I think most of the people who sign up for a call like this have some notion of what GTFS is, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much, but basically we're talking about the set of tables that end up in a little text file that collectively describe scheduled transit service for an agency. So trips and stops and shapes and all those sorts of things. Great. So we're all busy people. If you're only here for a little bit, I want to get right to the point. So GTFS is important. For many agencies, it's the foundation for other things like GTFS real-time and those real-time updates that are so great, as well as many of those planning applications like accessibility analyses and isochrones that are really cool to look at. But what we're finding as we use more feeds is that there's still a lot of errors in them, even in 2021. So we think that tools like Reflect can help agencies both validate their feeds better and also catch some other errors that normal feed validation tools will not catch. So that's the quick summary. I'm going to jump right into what we're seeing in terms of GTFS as a whole. So again, I think many people on the call are aware of like what is GTFS useful for. If you want to use swiftly, if you want to do all these important analyses, GTFS is a foundation for that. I think in this recent paper from UC Berkeley, they were looking at San Francisco MTA, which found that something like 24 of their internal processes are all based around GTFS feeds. So it is about customer navigation and providing that schedule data for things like Google Maps and other trip planners, but also so much more. So again, I wish that more agencies had it, right? So even in California, we're only seeing about 54% of agencies with these transit feeds. And even as agencies are making so many changes during COVID, restructuring service, cutting service, rescheduling things, this study found that only about 40% of feeds were being kept up to date with other schedule updates that were being posted on agency websites and things like that. So that's unfortunate. If you're someone just trying to catch your bus, if your GTFS data is either not there, or not present at all, or not kept up to date, that's not great. Of course, there's yet another layer, which is the layer we're talking about today, which is that the feed should be valid as people are trying to navigate on their trips. So in talking to agencies around the country, one thing they've told us is that some of the existing validation tools are not always cutting it for them. So for instance, there is a free Google Python GTFS validator tool. It's been around for 10 years. Also hasn't been updated much in those 10 years. And if you have problems with your feed, say it's telling you that the bus is going 90 miles per hour between these two segments and you got to fix this, it will tell you the first 5 errors that appear and then tell you have 8,000 other ones to go and fix, but it won't tell you where they are. So that's frustrating, right? Thankfully, many agencies rely on scheduling software that takes care of a lot of this. But we do find that even in these larger agencies that the feeds don't come out the way you would want. They still have errors. And if you're building that feed from scratch, goodness, that can be just really tough, even with some of the resources out there. So this feed validation, it's important. I think you all know that. So we particularly ran into some of these problems in a recent study we did for the Appalachian Regional Commission. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this to illustrate some of the top issues that we're seeing around the United States and certainly the world today. So for this study, ARC wanted to know how accessible areas were on public transit all throughout their region. So not just within Appalachia, but all of these 13 states. And GTFS is a great input for that, right? You can model how far you can get in 30 minutes to, what is the average accessibility to jobs on 30 minutes on transit. It's a really powerful input. And we worked with a great team to do that. The Center for Neighborhood Technology, CNT. If you haven't seen their all transit tool, it is so cool. It does all of these statistics for all cities and counties and visualizations of various demographics using GTFS data. So with CNT, they grabbed public GTFS feeds, they created GTFS feeds where they didn't exist, and then we ran these analyses. But of course, it's harder to analyze things when the source data has problems, when it has validation errors that we'll talk about in a moment. So for planning studies like these, for your navigation, for your customers, GTFS is really important. We want to share with you how we went around validating that. So we use the same open source validation libraries produced by Conveil and some IBI staff in this analysis that we are now making available for free at reflect.foursquareitp.com. You're watching it right now. So you upload a feed and it will tell you at a glance, you've got high priority errors, medium severity errors, and low severity errors. So those low severity errors, things just to be aware of. Medium severity, they could affect how the customer sees your transit service. And high severity are the things that will affect routing that are really not good to have. So Reflect will provide you all of these kinds of reports in a handy spreadsheet that you just saw flash by on the screen. So there's a lot of power there, and it's doing a lot of things for you very quickly. And so we hope, if you're looking for a feed validator, we think it's a really good one. And we'll tell you a little bit more about the extra features of Reflect at the end. So what did we see when we validated all these feeds across these 13 states? So these are the top 5 errors of those high priority errors, the ones that will affect customer navigation. So I'm not going to go into the details of like, this is exactly how it looks in the table, or this is exactly how you fix it. Some of them are self-explanatory. But I do want to let you know why they're important to fix and what they mean. So I'll be brief. The first 2, travel time negative, travel time 0. This basically means the bus is teleporting or it's traveling backwards in time. Both of those things are not possible. So if you're a customer trying to plan your trip, depending on what application you're using, it could result in kind of confusing results, right? That's not ideal. So one of the advantages of the Reflect validator is that it's actually more sensitive to some of these issues than the Google validator. So for instance, the Google validator, if you have 5 repeated stop times with travel time of 0, it will flag those for you. But the Reflect validator will catch even like one extra duplicated stop time. So it's very useful actually if you're getting into the nitty-gritty on your feed and fixing those issues. So third is outlying stops. So if you've worked with GTFS data before or put data on a map before, occasionally you will run into these cases where there's a point out in the Atlantic Ocean at 0 latitude and 0 longitude. So obviously those are bad. The Google validator will catch those issues for you. What's nice about the validator software used by Reflect is that we'll also look at just generally outlying stops. So if there's a stop that just is out of place in your area, it can flag those for you. Now, if you're operating a commuter service, many of your stops will be outlying. So maybe this will give you some false positives, but at the very least, it's a more sensitive kind of validation that you can use as you're validating your feed. So the 4th and 5th issue are kind of just related to GTFS tables talking to each other, the nitty-gritty of databases and tables. So unused routes, for instance, are routes that are kind of defined but not put into service. Referential integrity is you defined a trip that hit certain stops, but then those stops don't appear in your stops table. So there's no information about those stops. And so especially as agencies have changed service during COVID, these things can come up a lot, right? You drop a route or service gets cut, the GTFS feed gets a little messy. So some of that might be expected, but there's still errors that we want to fix, especially if you don't mean to drop routes. And the GTFS validator used by Reflect is actually really good at pulling out these kind of unused elements as well. So quite useful. I'm going to go through 5 more errors that are the medium priority errors, but I think they're actually just as important. And these are ones that were the top 5 errors seen in those 13 states. So duplicate IDs. This is, again, one of those kind of GTFS setup items that can just go wrong. So we see this most often when agencies will define their service calendar. So what is their weekday service, their Saturday service, their Sunday service? Sometimes they will just define those things twice. And you'll end up with 2 duplicate IDs. And depending on the application, it could result in confusing results. So the second, third, and fifth issues that we saw in the top 5 are, again, those kinds of, the bus is doing things it shouldn't be doing. It's going too fast. It's going too slow. It's stuck in the mud, as you can see there. So all of these issues are not fun if you're a customer. They're also an issue if you're trying to do analysis with your GTFS feeds. If you're trying to hook up to Swiftly to do those runtime analyses, if you're trying to do accessibility analyses with isochrones, these are the kinds of things you really want to fix or not have in your feed at all before you do those sorts of things. And then finally, number 4, mentioning that a little bit out of order, no service on a date. So this is another nice feature of this validator that's within Reflect, is that if you have a service calendar that covers an entire PIC, an entire few months of service, if you're missing service on a particular date, it will flag that for you. So say, for instance, on a holiday, you want to drop your weekday service. Maybe you forget to re-add Sunday service on that day. So the GTFS validator here will catch that kind of thing for you. So all these things are important to watch out for. We're seeing them a lot still, even in this age. So just want to make you aware that to be on the lookout for these things. So I want to do a quick recap of Appalachia. How did you do? All these 13 states. Who came out on top? Who's still working to improve a little bit? So as you can see from the map, West Virginia, Virginia, and New York had kind of the highest rates we saw of these high priority errors. Other states like Alabama, Georgia, and Pennsylvania did much better. So this is not a formal TCRP report or study, so I didn't associate any numbers. I don't want to get any phone calls tomorrow, critiquing or worrying about this and that. But in general, this is where we're seeing these sorts of issues. Across the country. It could be New York, it could be Mississippi, and everywhere in between. There are GTFS validation issues. Unless you think this is just, big agencies or small agencies, it's actually a lot of them. So we also did a cut by agency size. So came up with some rough buckets. Large includes places like New York City MTA, SEPTA in Philadelphia. Small are your agencies that maybe have 1 or 2 fixed routes in small towns. And so as you can see here, they all actually do pretty similar on those high priority errors. Thankfully, not too many, but there are certainly many for some of these feeds. As we look at more of those medium and low priority errors, the errors that affect kind of the way routes appear to customers or that are just kind of the nice to fix things, small agencies do have a little bit of trouble there. And this is really where you get into the nitty gritty of the GTFS specification. And some of the stuff is just hard. But of course, large agencies, as you can see there, have low priority errors as well. So I say all this to say that whether you're large or small, or wherever you are in those 13 states or in the US or in the rest of the world, these issues are hitting many different feeds. So what do we do about all this, right? So one is just to keep validating your feeds. We love that as planners who use GTFS, and your customers do too. One thing to be aware of, though, is that these validators are really just checking that a feed meets basic requirements of the GTFS specification. Are your number fields numbers? Are your date fields date? And some other reasonableness checks that are really useful, like the vehicle going very, very fast in a certain stop segment. But it's actually not able to kind of look at your system holistically the way you would look at it, right? So as you're checking a feed, you might be wondering, gosh, this pattern used to have 42 stops and now it has 30 stops. That seems wrong. Or didn't we used to have late night service with this pattern and not with that pattern, and somehow that's changed in this feed? Or, we lost a stop here, or we lost an hour of service somehow in that feed. So beyond just what the validators out there can do, I think at the agency level, we're concerned about, are we telling the true story about what service we've scheduled and about what our customers know about our service from riding it every day? So with MTA Maryland in Baltimore, Maryland, one of the US's largest transit agencies, we help them build the tools that are now a part of Reflect. So those include, I can go to the next slide, two major components. One is this GTFS validation we've been talking about. The free component is now public. You can use that as well. But we want to look from one feed to the next feed and see what changed. And then we can actually see more than what a normal feed validator would see. We can see, is the shape of this pattern changing? Are we losing stops on a pattern that we wouldn't expect? Are aggregate service levels the same as they were before? And if we need to, what is going on line by line in those feeds? Because as we find, as we make rapid service changes for COVID, and just in the normal scheduling process, the more you work on something, you run the risk of creating these regression errors that things are worse after you monkey with them a little bit. So this is that final check, that pause and reflect moment where you can look back and make sure that the service changes you're putting in your new feed are what you expect to be different from your last feed. In the process of doing this, we also realized with MTA that some of the feed errors that were appearing are not a part of the GTFS export process. They're not a part of that final cleanup of the feed before it goes public. Many of these issues are coming up during the scheduling process that happens before every service change. So as routes are getting retimed or realigned or stops are changing, and every one of those changes introduces the opportunities for error. So we built a separate set of tools that's very similar, but intended to be used for schedulers and scheduling managers who can then review these dashboards and apps, to see how service has changed, to make sure that standards are being met by the service that's about to be put into service, and just seeing it visually. Because certainly some scheduling tools will let you do that. Some are better than others and don't have this kind of functionality. So with Reflect, we provide that extra help. So this is our brief presentation. I want to leave you with a few thoughts, and then we can do Q&A. So one is just to validate early and often. If you're responsible for that at your agency, we hope you'll consider trying out the free validator at reflect.foursquareitp.com. I think you'll find it to be a really powerful tool in your arsenal. We also want you to be aware, though, that some of these feed errors are not the fault of your GTFS person or your person who's packaging that up. That often these are manifested by scheduling problems that have appeared earlier or that happened much earlier. So it's important to start those checks much sooner. Again, we have tools to help you do that. And then finally, you're all on this call because you're interested in GTFS. You probably think these things matter. I hope that you'll spread the word too. As you saw today, a lot of agencies still don't have GTFS feeds. Not all of the feeds are being kept up to date. We're still seeing validation errors here in 2021. So we're hoping to support agencies to do that with kind of our new free tools, but we're also interested in helping more with some of our other tools that are available as well. So I'm going to pause there. I've been talking very fast for a little while and just see if there are any questions and answers I can provide about what we just talked about. And if you would, you can use that chat function to type in. So I'll give it a minute. I realize one thing I didn't mention that I think is usually a question we get when we help agencies troubleshoot their GTFS feeds. is people will ask us, what's the best way to edit a GTFS feed or to create a GTFS feed? So one, if you're a smaller agency, a rural agency in particular, there is the RTAP program, which provides an Excel-based GTFS editor. You can even create shapes and do all those special things. They have some great support. So RTAP is great. And also some of the people behind some of the validation tools here at IBI produce a GTFS editor that's online. So they can also help you to deploy and edit your GTFS feed. There are a bunch of others like Trillium as well, but I'll just mention a few of those if you're wondering, how do I create a GTFS feed, or what's the best way to edit it? Cool. I actually don't see any other questions. Okay. Can you give an example of how one of these major GTFS problems transpire? So if I understand your question correctly, what is, too fast travel is probably the easiest one to explain. That if I'm trying to make it to an important appointment or to work on time, and the GTFS feed has too fast travel over some of my important stop segments, I might think I could leave later than I can. And so assuming you've gotten through some of the Google Transit Partners checks, and that is in Google Maps, people will be misled about how fast things are going. We also see some things happen where, agencies, as they're cutting out stops, will not update sort of subsequent times. So you'll end up taking a really long time to get from one stop to the next stop if a big deviation has been cut out. So that's, again, another thing that's hard to catch with existing GTFS validators. But we do have some tools with like runtime checks that are ways that you can find those other errors that are not necessarily problems against the GTFS specification, but that are nonetheless not good to have. So I did want to avoid some of the technical nitty-gritty explanation for this call. So I'm sorry if some of that real specific documentation is not available right now to you, but I'm of course happy. We offer, if you have questions after using our validator and want to understand why you got these errors, please reach out to us. We love talking about this stuff. So, yes, RTAP. If you can see the chat, it's RTAP, and actually, I think maybe Adam, if you're on the call, you could actually share the link, since I don't want to get too distracted. But
yeah, give me 1 sec. I'll type their
I think so.
web address into the chat.
They can also provide support as well for those rural transit agencies who are getting started with GTFS. And it's great too. We see urban agencies use it as well. It's free to use. So, although, like many things, it's based around Excel, so there's some limitations there, and things can get complicated. But you can eventually manage. There we go. Thank you, Adam. Great. Any final questions? I'll give it kind of 1, 2, kind of 3. Okay. All right. Well, you know where to find us. We are at reflect.foursquareitp.com. My email is here as well. We'll send out some follow-ups to just make sure you have the link. But we would love to talk to you. If you have questions about your validation results, we can help you answer them and sit down and walk you through them, help you illustrate them. We love talking about this stuff. And with that, I think I'm going to end the webinar unless there are any final questions. Thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate, there are a lot of webinars these days, and I appreciate you taking the time for this one. So that, thank you all so much.